Welcome back to Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. If you haven't listened to the previous chapters, you might want to start there. Otherwise, settle in as we step into the story of a man who shaped the Whitfield family, Andrew. Chapter 5, Andrew. The rhythmic clang of hammer on iron rang out through the morning air, echoing off the wooded hills and rocky ridges of Elizabeth, West Virginia. The forge, nestled in the valley beside the winding creek that fed the family's farm, was alive with heat and purpose. Smoke curled from the chimney, drifting up to mingle with the early mist that clung to the mountain slopes. Andrew Jackson Whitfield stood at the mouth of the forge, his towering frame commanding as ever. At 6 feet 4 inches, he was a man who seemed to have been forged from the very steel he shaped. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his hands, calloused and strong, bore the marks of decades of labor. Dark brown hair, streaked now with silver, fell in a thick wave that he kept neatly combed back, though sweat had already begun to dampen it. His sharp brown eyes, framed by creases etched from years of squinting at molten metal and hard decisions, missed nothing. He watched as Early swung the hammer with precision, each strike deliberate and steady. The firelight danced across Early's face, illuminating the sheen of sweat on his brow and the focus in his dark eyes. Though Andrew often reminded himself that Early was a grown man of 30, he couldn't help but see the boy who had first taken up a hammer with more determination than strength. "Good stroke, son," Andrew said, nodding as Early straightened, wiping his face with a soot-streaked rag. The compliment was brief, but carried weight coming from a man of Andrew's reserved nature. "Thanks, Pa," Early replied, his tone steady. His strong, weathered hands, much like Andrew's, rested briefly on the anvil before reaching for another horseshoe to shape. Curly was crouched nearby, his lean frame bent over a broken wagon wheel. His curly dark hair, unruly and damp with sweat, framed a face that always seemed to carry a hint of mischief. His blue shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing arms more wiry than his brother's, but just as capable. He threaded leather straps through the wheel frame with quick, sure fingers, his banjo resting within easy reach on a nearby stool. Andrew's gaze shifted to his older son, his brow furrowing slightly. "That will going to hold?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a hint of skepticism. Curly looked up, his easy grin flashing as he wiped his hands on his pants. "Better than new. Pa, trust me. I've got a knack for this sort of thing." Andrew crossed his arms, his posture solid as a granite outcrop. "Knack or not, leather and wheels won't keep this forge running. You'd do well to spend more time by the anvil." The grin on Curly's face faltered, just for a moment, before he shrugged it off. "That's why you've got Early. He's better at it anyway." "That's not the point," Andrew said, his voice growing firmer. "The forge isn't just work, it's a legacy. You think your ma and I built all this just so you could spend your days strumming that banjo?" Curly's brown eyes met his father's, a flicker of defiance in their depths. "I don't shirk the work, Pa, but life's got more to it than the forge." The tension hung heavy, like a summer storm waiting to break, until Early's voice cut in, calm and even. "Curly's good with the carriages, Pa, better than I am. That counts for something." Andrew turned to Early, his expression softening slightly. "It does. But this shop needs both of you working together. We don't have room for half measures." Curly returned to his work with a faint smirk, threading the last strap with practiced ease. Andrew shook his head and turned back to the forge, where Early was stoking the fire, the glow casting his broad frame in stark relief. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Andrew said quietly, watching his younger son's movements. "Don't let your brother drag you down." Early paused, his dark eyes steady as they met Andrew's. "Curly's not dragging me down, Pa. He works hard, just in his own way. We'll figure it out." Andrew didn't reply, his gaze fixed on the fire. He admired Early's quiet strength, but the lingering doubt about Curly's direction gnawed at him. He had built this forge with his own hands, shaping iron and steel into tools, weapons, and a livelihood. It was his pride, his purpose, and the thought of leaving it in uncertain hands weighed heavily on his mind. Elizabeth's voice carried across the yard, calling them in for lunch. Andrew straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth as he stepped out into the sunlight. The rolling hills surrounding the forge were lush and green, the creek sparkling as it wound its way through the valley. The scent of wildflowers mingled with the ever-present tang of heated metal, creating a harmony of nature and industry. Inside, Elizabeth's petite figure moved deftly around the kitchen. At just 5 feet tall, her fiery red hair and sharp blue eyes made her presence impossible to ignore. She set a steaming pot of stew on the table, her hands quick and sure despite their small size. The home she'd built with Andrew was modest but full of life, every corner bearing the mark of her care. As the men filed in, she glanced at Andrew, her sharp gaze catching the tension in his brow. "Everything all right out there?" she asked, her voice calm but pointed. "Fine," Andrew replied shortly, settling into his seat. "Just a busy morning." Elizabeth turned her attention to Curly. "How's the carriage coming along?" "Nearly done," Curly replied with a grin. "Should be ready by tomorrow." "Good," Elizabeth said with a nod. "You've got a knack for that work." Andrew said nothing, though her subtle praise hadn't gone unnoticed. As they ate, the tension eased, the conversation turning to the upcoming dance and the week's work. But Andrew's thoughts remained with the forge and the uncertain future of the family business. That evening, as the summer sun dipped below the horizon and the forge grew quiet, Andrew stood alone in the yard. The distant hum of cicadas filled the air, and the mountains loomed dark and steady against the star-speckled sky. His gaze rested on the darkened forge, his heart heavy with a mix of pride and worry. He thought of his sons, so different, yet so alike in their own ways. He prayed they'd find a way to rise to the challenges ahead, to carry the legacy he had built with Elizabeth. As the first cool breeze of the night brushed his face, Andrew's shoulders relaxed slightly. Whatever the future held, he would face it, just as he always had, one strike of the hammer at a time. Andrew Whitfield was not a man given to many words. His silence was a fortress, his presence enough to command attention. He was a man of strength, a man of secrets, the kind of father whose lessons weren't spoken but hammered into the iron he shaped with his bare hands. The mountains had carved him, just as surely as he had carved a life from them. But even the strongest of men carry burdens, and Andrew's were his alone to bear. That was Chapter 5 of Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. A man of iron, a man of silence. But what stories did that silence hide? Stick around for Chapter 6, coming soon. If you love storytelling and history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a chapter. See you next time.